You might want to watch for volume, Father Paul. I have the mic very close to my mouth this week.
You're a tiny talker, you'll be fine.
Yeah.
That is
Very
Joy
cool.
Davidman's son.
It is indeed. I will be introducing him next week to us. Yep. One of Joy's two sons.
Yes. September 19th.
Yeah. I met him.
Really?
I'm sure he remembers it vividly. Okay. Well, good evening, and let us pray. The Lord be with you. And may your spirit truly be with us this evening, Lord, as we once again seek you through the works of your servant, C.S. Lewis. May we be so nourished and strengthened thereby that we may be worthy servants and worthy followers of your Son, Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen. Well, you'll recall last time we got started on a number of ghosts whose issue had something to do with the nature of love. And as we move on today in the second part of this chapter, Lewis gives us yet another example. And this time it's the ever-present issue of lust in our world, another love gone sour. Now, for me, this is about the most hard-hitting chapter of all. It's the one I have found most helpful personally, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about that. And I'm going to read the whole account of the ghost with the lizard on his shoulder. Word for word, the whole account, so that we all have it fresh in our minds. There are different publications, so I don't know what the page is, but it's roughly the middle of chapter 11. If you care to follow along, it might be just as well just sit back and listen. So, I think you might remember a little bit about it. I don't know that I need to say much in preparation for it, so I think I'll just go ahead and read. I saw coming towards us a ghost who carried something on his shoulder. Like all the ghosts, he was unsubstantial, but they differed from one another as smokes differ. Some had been whitish. This one was oily and dark. What sat on his shoulder was a little red lizard, and it was twitching its tail like a whip and whispering things in his ear. As we caught sight of him, he turned his head to the reptile with a snarl of impatience. "Shut up, I tell you," he said. It wagged its tail and continued to whisper to him. He ceased snarling and presently began to smile. Then he turned and started to limp westward away from the mountains. "Off so soon?" said a voice. The speaker was more or less human in shape, but larger than a man, and so bright that I could hardly look at him. His presence smote on my eyes and on my body too, for there was heat coming from him as well as light. Like the morning sun, at the beginning of a tyrannous summer day. "Yes, I'm off," said the ghost. "Thanks for your hospitality, but it's no good. You see, I told this little chap," and here he indicated the lizard, "that he'd have to be quiet if he came, which he insisted on doing, but of course, his stuff won't do here. I realize that. But he won't stop. I shall just have to go home." "Would you like me to make him quiet?" said the flaming spirit, an angel, as I now understood. "Of course I would," said the ghost. "Then I will kill him," said the angel, taking a step forward. "Oh, look out, you're burning me. Keep away," said the ghost, retreating. "Don't you want him killed?" "You didn't say anything about killing him at first. I hardly meant to bother you with anything so drastic as that." "It's the only way," said the angel, whose burning hands were now very close to the lizard. "Shall I kill it?" "Well, that's a further question. I'm quite open to consider it, but it's a new point, isn't it? I mean, for the moment, I was only thinking about silencing it because up here, well, it's so damned embarrassing. May I kill it?" "Well, there's time to discuss that later." "There is no time." "May I kill it?" "Please, I never meant to be such a nuisance. Please, really, don't bother. Look, it's gone to sleep on its own accord. I'm sure it'll be all right now. Thanks ever so much." "May I kill it?" "Honestly, I don't think there's the slightest necessity for that. I'm sure I shall be able to keep it in order now. I think the gradual process would be far better than killing it. The gradual process is of no use at all. Don't you think so?" "Well, I'll think over what you've said very carefully. I honestly will. In fact, I'd let you kill it now, but as a matter of fact, I'm not feeling frightfully well today. It would be silly to do it now. I need to be in good health for the operation. Some other day, perhaps." "There is no other day. All days are present now." "Get back! You're burning me." "How can I tell you to kill it? You'd kill me if you did." "It is not so." "Why, you're hurting me now." "I never said it wouldn't hurt you. I said it wouldn't kill you." "Oh, I know. You think I'm a coward. But it isn't that. Really, it isn't. I say, let me run back to by tonight's bus and get an opinion from my own doctor. I'll come again the first moment I can. This moment contains all moments." "Why are you torturing me? You're jeering at me. How can I let you tear me to pieces? If you wanted to help me, why didn't you kill the damned thing without asking me before I knew? It would be all over by now if you had." "I cannot kill it against your will. It is impossible. Have I your permission?" The angel's hands were almost closed on the lizard, but not quite. Then the lizard began chattering to the ghost so loud that even I could hear what he was saying. "Be careful," it said. "He can do what he says. He can kill me. One fatal word from you and he will. Then you'll be without me forever and ever." And remember what me is. Me is lust, as we said before. "One fatal word from you and he will, and then you'll be without me forever and ever." It's not natural. How could you live? You'd only be a sort of ghost, not a real man, as you are now. He doesn't understand. He's only a cold, bloodless, abstract thing. It may be natural for him, but it isn't for us. Yes, I know there are no real pleasures now, only dreams. But aren't they better than nothing? And I'll be so good. I admit sometimes I've gone too far in the past, but I promise I won't do it again. I'll give you nothing but really nice dreams, all sweet and fresh and almost innocent. You might say, quite innocent. Have I your permission? Said the angel to the ghost. I know it will kill me. It won't. But supposing it did? You're right. It would be better to be dead than to live with this creature. Then may I? Damn and blast you! Go on, can't you? Get over it! Do what you like, bellowed the ghost, but ended whimpering, God help me, God help me. Next moment, the ghost gave a scream of agony such as I never heard on earth. The burning one closed his crimson grip on the reptile, twisted it while it bit and writhed, and then flung it, broken-backed, on the turf. Oh, that's done for me, gasped the ghost, reeling backwards. For a moment, I could make out nothing distinctly. Then I saw between me and the nearest bush, unmistakably solid, but growing every moment solider, the upper arm and shoulder of a man. Then, brighter still and stronger, the legs and hands, the neck and golden head materialized while I watched. And if my attention had not wavered, I should have seen the actual completing of a man, an immense man, naked, not much smaller than the angel. What distracted me was the fact that at the same moment, something seemed to be happening to the lizard. At first, I thought the operation had failed. So far from dying, the creature was still struggling and even growing bigger as it struggled. And as it grew, it changed. Its hinder parts grew rounder. The tail, still flickering, became a tail of hair that flickered between huge and glossy buttocks. Suddenly, I started back, rubbing my eyes. What stood before me was the greatest stallion I had ever seen. Silvery white, but with mane and tail of gold. It was smooth and shining, rippled with swells of flesh and muscle, whinnying and stamping with its hooves. At each stamp, the land shook and the trees dindled. The new-made man turned and clapped the new horse's neck. It nosed his body, his bright body. Horse and master breathed into each other's nostrils. The man turned from it, flung himself at the feet of the burning one, and embraced them. When he rose, I thought his face shone with tears. But it may have only been the liquid love and brightness, one cannot distinguish them in that country, which flowed from him. I had not long to think about it. In joyous haste, the young man leaped upon the horse's back. Turning in his seat, he waved a farewell and nudged the stallion with his heels, and they were off before I well knew what was happening. There was riding, if you like. I came out as quickly as I could from among the bushes to follow them with my eyes, but already they were only like a shooting star far off in the great plain. And soon among the foothills of the mountains, then still like a star, I saw them winding up, scaling what seemed impossible steeps, and quicker every moment, until near the dim brow of the landscape, so high that I must strain my neck to see them, they vanished, bright themselves, into the rose brightness of that everlasting morning. My goodness. So what does that say to you?
We got a chance.
What?
We have a chance.
We have a chance. This is the first guy that actually gets into the high country. Hooray for him, huh? After all these weeks. What?
Happened when he says, Stanley last you know on occasion, and he says, God help, God help.
Yeah.
Really is asking God for help with that prophetic time.
And that small sentence, those few words, are the turning point of the whole thing. He asks for God's help because he doesn't have the courage to do it, and that's granted to him, apparently. So that little brief, God help me, is a very key sentence here. What's the lesson here? What's Lewis's point in this incredibly dramatic account? What was the lizard? What did it represent?
I guess evil, devil. Is that right or wrong?
Lust. The man's got sex problems. Okay? He can't stop himself. He can't imagine being a man as long as, if that's taken away from him. Then what happens? And it's been going on so long for him that although he can't imagine life without it, he's sick to death of this, what would you say, his, can't think of the word, addiction. He's a sex addict. What happens? The angel takes the lizard and kills it. Was it easy? It hurt like bloody hell. He thought he was going to die from it. There was nothing easy or painless about his giving in to God. Important to keep that in mind. Then what happens? The lizard turns into something else. Speak up, please. All right, and this is the key part. This is where the hope comes. This is where the redemption comes. The lizard turns into a stallion, a magnificent stallion. His problem with lust, something that drove him and spoke to him and strongly influenced him, becomes something with the added strength and change that has taken place. Remember, he was just a little shadow, and now he's this impressive, muscled man, almost as big as the angel, it says. And what does he do? What does he do with the horse? He controls the horse. He gets on the horse. He drives that horse. And where do the two of them go together? They're on their way. They're becoming more human, more horsey, if you will. They're on the way. There has been a complete redemption going on that will continue because all these folks continue to grow when they're in heaven too. We've seen that in a number of places. Well, so what? Why would Lewis spend all this time and energy on this story? What's the message for you and me?
It ain't easy.
Yeah, that's right. It isn't always easy. But what's your? Yeah, go ahead, Father Paul.
The sin or the temptation or the evil is a perversion of something that is good.
Yes.
And somehow a part of your conversion has to be, not everything has to be cold turkey. Part of it is converting that which is good or
Redeeming.
good back into what was good.
Yeah.
Removing the evil.
Yeah. Remember Lewis's big point, as Father Paul is pointing out. What's behind all that lust? What is the lust? Something that God created good that has gotten all twisted and distorted and bent. This magnificent redemption has occurred. And now the man is able to control the lust that was there, and it is slowly turning into something of great beauty and health and appropriateness. Now, maybe I'm the only one in the room that deals with besetting sins, and that could be the case. After all, I haven't been Anglican all my life like a lot of you have been. I've been Methodist and Lutheran and Presbyterian, and no wonder I'm all messed up. But I have besetting sins. I'll just stand here and come out and say it. And don't you tell me you don't, because I know you do. And you're lucky if you only have one. It is good for me, it has been good for me to know and to watch the process begin, at least in my life, to see the things that I cannot defeat on my own, the things that hold me back, the things that reduce me to subhuman stature in one way or another, slowly being redeemed as I stop trying and I give the situation over to the Lord, and watch how some of the things that were dropping me down the most have been something that God is using in my life for good, as it untwists and turns back to what it was meant to be in the first place. I've seen that happening in my own life. And I would like to think all of you folks know and love the Lord, I pray, and you've been at it for a long time. And I would like to think that your besetting sins aren't what they used to be. Maybe they're not. Maybe I don't know that we defeat all of our besetting sins in this life, but we strive in that direction. And we know we can't do it unless God does it for us. We're helpless about these things. But such hope that is there, and such beauty, that the things that drag us into the pit, the things that make us lower than a snake's belly on a wagon rut, as my brother used to say, are things that can be redeemed to become our strongest points in our life. Seems to me this is what Lewis is trying to say. It's a profound word of hope, and we don't call Jesus the Redeemer for no reason, because Jesus is in the business of redeeming, and that means taking something and making it back to its original usefulness, or something like that. So the idea, I think, is a magnificent idea. And to me, it's no wonder that Lewis chooses to let this be a success story this time. Now, does this help? Does this take your thinking anywhere in particular?
I think this is one of the biggest psychological examinations of the struggle between conversion and temptation, and the number of rationalizations. And these are sentences he said before, and he's very well practiced at giving excuses, and he knows which one comes after which one. But by the end, he's down to just, God help me, and
Yeah.
there's conversion.
Yeah.
Yeah, the number of rationalizations and excuses and pauses he gives is very interesting. Especially when the angel says there is no time.
Yeah.
Today is the day. This is the hour. Ugh.
That's right. Yeah.
Lower your lapel mic just a little bit. Perfect.
Hope that stays put there. All right, well, that's something for us all to think about and pray about in our lives, and continuing to do so, because, as I said, if we're honest with ourselves, we have those sins that we have a very difficult time defeating in our life. And there is redemption, even for those, even in the midst of our discouragement, because our attempts haven't worked. Maybe in some new way, we can find a way to hand those things over to the Lord. And in the Lord's timing, maybe we can see them turned into golden stallions as well. Well, the narrator, Lewis, of course, has some questions about this. So after this scene goes away, Lewis talks, or the narrator talks, with our friend George MacDonald. Am I right in thinking that the lizard really turned into the horse? Aye, but it was killed first. You'll not forget that part of the story. But does it mean that everything that is in us can go on up into the mountains? Nothing, not even the best and noblest, can go on to the mountains as it is now. Nothing, not even what is lowest and most bestial, will not be raised again if it submits to death. Not because they're too rank, but because they're too weak. What is a lizard compared with a stallion? Lust is a poor, weak, whimpering, whispering thing compared with that richness and energy of desire which will arise, properly focused now, when lust has been killed. And then he ends this section with this very poignant expression. If the risen body, even of appetite, that is lust, is as grand a horse as ye saw, what would the risen body of maternal love or friendship be? So he's saying human appetite is among the lower things, but maternal love, when it's pure, friendship, when it's pure, imagine if they were completely resurrected, completely redeemed, what kind of a horse would that end up looking like? All right, I would want to dwell on this, and I would suggest you all read this passage yourself prayerfully and see where the Lord takes you in the midst of that. But if there's nothing else to be said, we'll move on. I always hate to move on from this part of the book because I love it so. All right, in our final chapters then, we have the tragedian and the dwarf shadows. They're both shadows. And do you have any thoughts about this before I bloviate on my way? All right, I'll bloviate. We run in this chapter, very interesting, to a woman named Sarah Smith, and she is one of the great ones in heaven. She's so great that Lewis kind of suggests, is this her? Who do you think he's thinking it is? The Virgin Mary, yes. And of course, MacDonald said, no, it's not her. He says, fame in this country and fame on earth are two quite different things. Remember, this woman comes and there's this grand procession. You know, all of nature is singing and rejoicing, and there's men and boys kind of parading on one side and women and young ladies on the other side. There's animals all over the place. It's just magnificent. Who are these people? Well, I misspelled it here. Her lovers, her children. Further, every beast and bird that came near her had its place in her love. In her, they became themselves. And now, the abundance of life she has in Christ from the Father flows over into them. This is pure agape love, God's love, unselfish love, love that does not seek anything in return. And it's the first time in the book the name of Christ is mentioned, and as far as I can recall, the only time. Lewis generally tries not to be too religious, even in his religious books, lest he put off skeptics. So, yeah,
You have to like the line he quotes from Milton. 1,000 liveried angels lacking her.
Oh, lackeyed her.
I just love that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So if we had seen Sarah Smith on earth, would we have noticed her? Yeah. She's just probably middle class, maybe lower class woman living in some middle class, low class suburb of somewhere or another. Not wealthy, but had a great love. And those who were associated with her benefited from her. And she was a vessel for the love of Christ to all those people. It's like Jesus with the children constantly. I always have to remind myself when I think about Jesus that when I'm thinking of him conversing with the Pharisees and throwing out his woes against you, the children loved to be with Jesus. Remember, the disciples had to rebuke Jesus. In fact, they rebuked each other, sort of. And Jesus said, let the children come unto me. But the children wanted to. What does that tell you about the nature of Jesus and how we should feel when we approach him? Anybody who loves being with kids and who draws kids like a magnet is going to be a great person to be with at any rate. And that is mirrored in her. That's who she was. So even though she was a nothing here on earth, all the while she was living here on earth, things were happening of lasting eternal significance, such that in heaven she's one of the great ones. So much so that she could be confused for the Virgin Mary herself. That's encouragement for us too, as we go about our good works, and whether or not we're appreciated as we should be for our good works. Well, she happens to be the love interest of this grimy pair of people, the tragedian and the dwarf. And the subject here is pity as a form of blackmail. And once again, there's so many things we could say and go through. It's a rather long section too. And we have no time, so I'm just going to focus on a few things here. This glorious woman looks at Frank and says, Frank, look at me. What are you doing with that great, ugly doll? Let go of the chain. Send it away. It is you I want. And so we learn what? Who's the real person here? The dwarf, the one that looks like a organ grinder's monkey being carried around on a chain, that's the real person. And the big person is the front that he's putting on. He's taking on an act rather than being his true self. But the light that reached this little dwarf reached him, and here we see it again. Lewis won't let us forget. Reached him against his will. All who are in hell, what? Choose it. Choose it. Stop acting. It's no good. He's killing you. You're using other people's pity in the wrong way. And then there's so the whole thing is about being true to yourself, being who you are, and not being dishonest in the things that you say and do toward other people, trying to manipulate them to get pity from them or to get revenge or whatever else might be your issue. Here's another section I thought was quite important. But what we called love down there, meaning earth, was mostly the craving to be loved. In the main, I loved you for my own sake, because I needed you. Boy, that's something for us all to keep in mind. Remember, Lewis pointed out to us in something I read to you last week about selfishness, that we are at any moment being selfish, repenting from being selfish, or about to be selfish. That the self is going to have its claim on us as long as we're alive. Hopefully we're growing, we're being sanctified, but that doesn't mean we've stopped the battle with selfishness. And that's his point here too. Human loves are all basically about the self. There's something we get out of it. And if we got nothing out of it at all, which means it then becomes godly love, we're not so good at that. And that's the point that he makes there. I find for myself, I may not have a wife, but I have 16 nieces and nephews and 3 sisters and quite an extended family and other people that I have loved in my life. And I've got to say, when I'm honest with myself, it doesn't take me long to see the selfishness in all those loves. They don't respond to me exactly the way I want them to. Well, all right, I can play that game too, and all that sort of thing very quickly can take over. All right, so they get talking again about the nothingness of evil. And we have to wait to the end, to the most poignant account of this in the whole book. Remember, we've had a number of instances where people have wanted to take someone or something back down with them to hell. Do you remember that time when one of these shadows was trying to pick up a golden apple, and he could only find the very smallest one, and with untold effort, he manages to pick that up and stumble off to the bus. And an angelic voice tells him, "Put it down, you fool. There's no room for it in heaven." I mean, in hell. There's no room for it in hell. Here, he finally unfolds his whole thought on this subject. So MacDonald goes down on his hands and knees and with a blade of grass pointed to a crack in the soil so small that I could not have identified it without his aid. "I cannot be certain that this is the crack ye came up through, but through a crack no bigger than that ye certainly came." Do you mean then that hell, all that infinite empty town, is down in some little crack like this? Yes, all hell is smaller than one pebble of your earthly world, but it is smaller than one atom of this world, the real world. Let me read that again. All hell is smaller than one pebble of your earthly world, but it is smaller than one atom of this real world up in heaven. A damned soul is nearly nothing, he says. It is shrunk, shut up in itself, selfishness. Good beats upon the damned incessantly as sound waves beat upon the ears of the deaf, but they cannot receive it. Their fists are clenched, their teeth are clenched, their eyes fast shut. First they will not, and in the end, cannot open their hands for gifts, or their mouths for food, or their eyes to see. It's a theme we've been hearing throughout the whole book, isn't it? Okay, we hasten on. Now, the farther you go in the book, as you may recall, you may have found your head sort of spinning. He starts talking about time and chessboards and things. And I have struggled over many years to try to figure it all out. And what I'm giving you is my best efforts up to this time. But we have nowhere near the kind of time. This is the sort of thing you sit down with cigars and beer and talk about. Well, ladies, maybe you just can have a glass of wine and talk about this, on and on and on, because it gets very complex. But basically what's going on is this. Lewis is still concerned with McDonald about all of this. And he's wanting, just tell me in black and white, who gets into heaven? And how do they do it? So the narrator ghost is still puzzled about this. He says to McDonald, in your own books, sir, you were a universalist. That's someone who believes everybody's going to heaven. You talked as if all would be saved, and St. Paul too. I'm not sure what Lewis meant by that, but anyway. Ye can know nothing of the end of all things. All answers deceive. If you put the question from within time and are asking about possibilities, the answer is certain. The choice of ways is before you. Neither is closed. Any man may choose eternal death. Those who choose it will have it. So as long as you and I are on planet Earth, living on a timeline where time goes by second by second by second, as long as that's the game, then it's very clear. You have a choice. You can choose heaven, you can choose hell, and you get what you ask for. That part's simple and what most of us think about. But if you're trying to leap into eternity, if you are trying to see the final state of all things as it will be, then there's no more possibilities left, but only the real. That's heaven. And when heaven is finally all in all, then everything is truly hard and solid and real. Then you ask what cannot be answered to mortal ears. All right, now, again, you read a lot of Lewis and you get the benefit of seeing him talk about the same thing in different books. Here's what Lewis has to say about the nature of time in his famous Mere Christianity. See if this is helpful. Most of us can imagine God attending to any number of applicants if only they came one by one, and he had an endless time to do it in. The difficulty is God having to fit too many things into one moment. Almost certainly, God is not in time. His life does not consist of moments following one another. If 1 million people are praying to him at 10:30 tonight, he need not listen to them all in that one snippet, which we call 10:30. 10:30 and every other moment from the beginning of the world is always the present for him. He has all eternity to listen to the split second of prayer put up by a pilot as his plane crashes in flames. This is difficult, he goes on, I know. Let me try to give something not the same, but a bit like it. Suppose I'm writing a novel. I write, Mary laid down her work. The next moment came a knock at the door. For Mary, who has to live in the imaginary time of my story, there is no interval between putting down the work and hearing the knock. But I, who am Mary's maker, do not live in that imaginary time at all. Between writing the first half of that sentence and the second, I might sit down for 3 hours and think about Mary. And the hours would not appear in Mary's time, the time inside the story, at all. If you picture time as a straight line along which we have to travel, then you must picture God as the whole page upon which the line is drawn. In that case, what we call tomorrow is visible to him in just the same way as what we call today. All the days are now for him. He does not remember you doing things yesterday. He simply sees you doing them. Because though you have lost yesterday, he has not. He knows your tomorrow's actions in just the same way because he's already in tomorrow. This idea has helped me a good deal. If it does not help you, leave it alone. It is not in the Bible or any of the creeds. You can be a perfectly good Christian without accepting it, or indeed without thinking of the matter at all. I'm going to just keep going here because it all should help to see where Lewis is going. And so it is when you consider time, and then if you don't live on the timeline. MacDonald says this: it was not once long ago that Jesus descended into hell. Time does not work that way when once he have left the earth. All moments that have been or shall be were or are present in the moment of his descending. There is no spirit in prison to whom he did not preach. And remember, by prison he means hell, which is what Lewis has been writing about all this time. MacDonald suggests this: universalism, which he mentions in the book, presents a roadblock to understanding God's full heavenly realities. If everybody gets to go to heaven, then you don't have your freedom of individual choice. God has overruled your choice. You're going to heaven. Predestination does the same thing, he says. Predestination is God chooses some and not others. Once again, it's not a human choice, Lewis says. Somebody else has made the choice. You have lost your human freedom. And for Lewis, the human ability to make their own choices becomes very important. Now, I don't go along with Lewis with everything that he's saying here, but it's my job to help you understand what Lewis is saying. And then we can have all sorts of discussions at some other point. Reading on, so MacDonald, that is Lewis, who's really writing this, tells us that all answers deceive. We cannot understand how reality works outside the time lane where God lives. But God is not stuck in our timeline. Our past, our present, and our future are all his eternal present. And then he makes it clear, the human brain is too small to comprehend all that this means. I don't know if you can catch what's really going on here. He's talking about why people from hell get a chance to go to heaven. And that's what has been bothering Lewis all along. He keeps asking all these questions about that. And Lewis's understanding is that we don't quite understand how God can work who's not stuck in the timeline. There's nothing in our experience or in the size of our brains to help us to see what reality for us and for everybody else is going to be like once you and I are no longer on the timeline either. Okay? He says, and he's speculating here what he thinks might be the case, but he's been clear to tell us, I'm not teaching you hard, fast theology here. I'm telling you a story about a dream. So don't think I know more than I do know about all of this. Well, this takes us finally to chapter 14, the chess match. Very difficult, very difficult. And after more study, it's just today that I rewrote this page yet again, which is my third or fourth time redoing this page because it befuddles me. But anyway, this is how I understand it at this point. Lewis says most of this very clear, and I think it's just finally catching on to where he's coming from. So there's this, he has in his dream this view of this chess table, and there's alive chess pieces on the board moving around on the chessboard. He says the chess board is time, all right? Very limited. Here it is. That's all of time right there. We, you and me, are the chess pieces as we appear to ourselves and others, moving and acting trapped on the chessboard, trapped on the timeline. Each piece, each person, you and I, act according to the choices of our immortal souls. Remember, they're standing, looming, watching what's going on in the chessboard. But they're huge, and they're not on the chessboard. They're not in time. They're in the great reality where God is. The choices of, so let me read that again. Each piece acts according to the choices of its immortal soul who is outside the timeline. The choices of our souls have been made perhaps before or long after we act those choices out on the timeline. So he's saying the same thing he said before, if you're following where we're going here, about what it means to not be stuck on the timeline. He saw the choices a bit more clearly than ye could see them on the earth. This is what he says, MacDonald says to Lewis about this chessboard and everything else he's talking about. You saw the choices a bit more clearly than you would see them than you could see them on the earth. The lens was clearer, but it was still seen through a lens. So for Lewis, there's always this but that comes in there. You're not seeing reality as it is. You're seeing something through a lens, and the lens is going to distort, and it's going to be incomplete, so don't think you're seeing the whole picture. Do not ask of a vision in a dream more than a vision in a dream can give. If ye come to tell of what ye have seen, make it plain that it was but a dream, not real. See ye make it very plain. Give no poor fool the pretext to think you are claiming knowledge of what no mortal knows. God has forbidden it. Okay? So he's giving us an opportunity to think about what it means to be in eternity, to not be in the timeline. He's making some speculations about that, and he opens the door for you to start to ponder that whole imponderable. Well, we're about out of time, so we must go on. Boom! Suddenly, there's a sunrise. And this is right at the very end. This sunrise is brilliant. The light, like solid blocks. Remember, light itself has substance. So a beam of light is like a diamond arrow. The light, like solid blocks, intolerable of weight and edge, came thundering upon my head. Oh, so all this that's happened in this whole book has been what? Time of day. It's been dawn. The sun hasn't come up yet. Now, let's see how good you are. Why does he say this here at the very end? What did we find way back in the beginning of the book, near 2 months ago?
Gloomy. Gloomy.
What?
Gloominess.
Yeah, but that's not what he's thinking of, I don't think. Father Paul?
It was dusk. The sun was about to go down, and there would be real darkness.
On the bus, at the very beginning, before they even got up to the heavenly regions, there was this conversation going on. All right? Shh, it will be dark presently, he mouthed to Lewis. Lewis says, you mean the evening is really going to turn into night in the end? He nodded. No one wants to be out of doors when that happens. Who are they? And what are you afraid they'll do to you? Here, said the big man, who's talking all that stuff? You shut your face. Quite right, scandalous. Ought to be prosecuted, growled the other passengers. They're scared to death. They know something's going to happen. The dusk is going to turn into night, and something terrible is going to change when that happens. So he starts with this in the beginning. And if you read really carefully, you catch it at the end when daybreak actually happens in heaven. This is my guess, is when finally dusk has turned to night down in hell. And the opportunities for bus rides is over. And that's what they were afraid of. Things are going to get a lot worse in hell than what we saw. If you were wondering why hell didn't always seem to be completely awful in every way, I mean, there were stores, there were things to do. It's because it wasn't really full-blown hell yet, just like it wasn't full glorious day up above either. So it makes me think that perhaps Lewis is suggesting, and we have talked about this, that hell in the Great Divorce is really more like maybe a sort of purgatory. Lewis thought there probably was a purgatory, so it would make sense for him to think that way. He's not very open about it in the book, but that fits. That's how come the people from hell can stay in heaven. And so Lewis's theology doesn't seem as universalist as it might have seemed before, like anybody for all eternity can keep going up to heaven if they want to. But again, Lewis reminds us, we don't know what all the details are once you get into eternity and out of the timeline. Don't pretend you got all that worked out, because once you're off the timeline, you're in a realm of being that we can't begin to really understand.
So would you say all the answers aren't strictly in the Bible then?
All we need to know is given us in the Bible. But again, Scripture makes it clear to us our brains are too small. Jesus says, I have more that I can tell you, or could tell you, but you're not ready yet. And I think that holds true right to the end of time. Well, then you turn to the last page and thump, Lewis falls out of bed and realizes this has all been a dream, and he's back in the real world. And that is the end of the Great Divorce. Thank you. Having said that, we do have about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. Any questions or thoughts? I mean, there's so much that we could talk about.
What was Lewis's denomination or
Anglican.
Anglican?
He was a very faithful, the minute he was converted, he became a very strong Anglican. He went to chapel every day at the colleges where he taught.
But he grew up for a time in Belfast?
Yes, but he was Anglican there too.
Not Catholic?
No, he was never Catholic. Tolkien is Catholic, but Lewis was always, and at any time that he was a churchgoer, it was always Anglican.
But as a child, he went to church.
Yeah, he was raised to go to church, and he believed in God. He prayed and everything, and then he tossed it all out in his early teen years. Yeah, Mark.
If everything appears at one time, then we can pray for people who have passed away for their salvation.
Now here, I'm not sure I know the Anglican answer to that, so I'm going to turn that over to Father Paul.
And we're out of time. Well, yeah, that's a sticky one. You can pray, and we do pray actually every Sunday, every time we gather together, we pray. But we don't necessarily pray in the way that you just mentioned, that their judgment would be changed and reversed. That would be something that would be a bit of a theological stretch. And that's not actually part of our tradition. But, I mean, I don't know what it's going to hurt, unless what it means is that you relinquish your responsibility to be a light or salt in this world, because you'll just pray for them after they die. If that's the reason you're doing it, then no. But if you just pray what we would do, Lord have mercy upon him, Christ have mercy upon him, Lord have mercy upon him. And really, it's not for us, no clergyman, no bishop, no archbishop, to decide who is in heaven, who is in hell. Now, here's an interesting thing. At a funeral, if a bishop presides over a funeral, he doesn't use his crozier. Why doesn't he use his shepherd's staff? because he has no jurisdiction anymore. That realm is completely out of his jurisdiction. And so he presides over the funeral, but it's all to God now. So we still pray. And we pray if you listen closely in our liturgy. But, if you pray 10 times, do they come out of hell? Or, that's really, we have no jurisdiction there. So it's kind of an unanswerable question, but it's definitely not something to bank on. So
It's not something to rule out.
it's not something to necessarily rule out, but typically we would shy away from saying yes to your question. We would say no. And when we pray for the departed, we're not praying them out of hell and into heaven. We're praying essentially that they would grow, like what C.S. Lewis says in the Chronicles of Narnia, the last battle, further up and further in. We simply pray that they would be received more and more, and that the endlessness of God that they're experiencing would be greater and greater to them. That's what we're praying for. Mm-hmm. Are we praying that someone who's condemned to hell, that God's judgment would change after their death? It's not in any of our liturgies, I'll say that. Since there's no jurisdiction there, it's real hard to make a decision as to what is and what isn't, and what can and what can't. Could hurt. I'll say that. But anyhow,
I guess we'll find out.
you'll find it out.
That's for sure.
That's right.
Well, this concludes Lewis and the Great Divorce. It does not conclude the month. So next week I have prepared a detailed slideshow giving us the whole life of C.S. Lewis, so you can find out more about this guy. All right, thank you.
Thank you.